I never thought a strip of grass behind my fence could destroy so much peace in my life. It started as a quiet corner of my property, a small patch of wildflowers, a few stones, and the sound of birds at sunrise. My late wife Anna used to call it our quiet meadow. It was the only place she wanted to sit when her illness got worse. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to change a single thing, not even the way the grass grew unevenly along the slope. But one morning, when I opened my mailbox, I found an envelope from the HOA, thick paper, gold lettering. It said Community Access Project Phase 3. I didn't understand at first, then I looked at the attached map and my heart dropped. A line ran straight through the back of my property. A dotted gray path labeled Public Walking Trail Extension. They wanted to build a sidewalk right through my yard, through Anna's meadow. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I walked down to the HOA office the next morning. It's a small brick building by the entrance of our neighborhood, pretty enough from the outside, but inside it always felt cold. The manager, Susan Harlow, was sitting behind her polished desk. She smiled too quickly when she saw me. "Oh, Mr. Langley, yes, we were expecting some questions." I held up the paper. "This has to be wrong. You can't build a public path through private property." Susan folded her hands, calm and rehearsed. "Well, technically, that strip of land at the edge of your backyard falls under community easement. It's still your responsibility to maintain it, but the HOA reserves the right to use it for community improvements." Her tone was syrupy, but the words burned. "That's not what I bought," I said quietly. "I paid for that land. I planted every flower there." Susan's smile thinned. "The records are clear, Mr. Langley. The easement extends 15 feet from your back fence line. The new trail will pass right through that zone." I wanted to yell, but instead I turned and walked out. That night I sat on the old wooden bench Anna and I built together. The air smelled of rain. The wind pushed through the tall grass. I could almost hear her humming like she used to, faint and soft. I whispered to the empty air, "They can't take this, Anna, not this." For the next few days I tried everything: letters, emails, even an official appeal. They responded with cold paragraphs about community benefit and enhancing neighborhood connectivity. Words that meant nothing to me. A few weeks later, surveyors showed up. Two men in orange vests walked straight into my backyard without knocking. They hammered little stakes into the soil, bright pink ribbons fluttering from each one. I asked them to leave. They said they were authorized by the HOA. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're trespassing," I said. The taller one shrugged. "You'll need to take that up with the board." When they left, my backyard looked like it had been stabbed by neon flags. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked outside around midnight barefoot, feeling the cool soil under my feet. I remembered how Anna had once said she wanted a small pond there someday, just enough for lilies, she'd said. We never built it. I looked around at those flags fluttering in the dark. That's when the idea came. If they wanted a path, they'd have to build it over water. The next morning I went to the hardware store. I bought shovels, a pond liner, stones, and a cheap pump system. The cashier asked, "Big project?" I smiled faintly. "You could say that." Over the next week I dug every day. The neighbors watched from their porches. Some waved, some whispered. The soil was heavy, the sun relentless, but I kept going. Every shovel of dirt felt like defiance. One evening, as the pond started to take shape, a man in a navy blazer showed up. HOA board member, the type who thought wearing a clipboard gave him power. He leaned on my fence. "Mr. Langley, we heard about your excavation." "It's called a pond," I said. "You can't make structural changes on easement property." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. I thought it was my responsibility to maintain it. He narrowed his eyes. "Maintenance, not modification. This pond will have to be filled back in before construction begins. Then I guess you'll have to fill it yourself." He glared at me like I was some sort of delinquent. "We'll be in touch." That night I filled the pond completely. The water shimmered under the moonlight. I planted lilies and set a small wooden bench beside it. The sound of water trickling through the stones filled the air. For the first time in months I felt peace. The next morning I found a notice taped to my door. "Cease and desist. Violation of HOA property modification policy." Underneath in red ink, it said fines pending. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the path. It was about control. A few days later, Susan showed up at my door herself with a clipboard and two other board members in tow. They didn't even ask to come in. She pointed at the pond from the patio. "This has to go, Mr. Langley. It violates multiple HOA codes." I stood beside her, calm but shaking inside. "You said that strip was mine to maintain, so I maintained it. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Susan crossed her arms. "If you refuse to comply, we will pursue legal action. The trail construction begins next month." I smiled faintly. "You'll need to drain the pond first." She didn't respond, just turned around and left, muttering something to the others. That night I sat by the water again. The surface reflected the porch lights like small stars. I whispered, "I made your pond, Anna." A frog croaked somewhere in the dark. I took that as a yes. 2 days later, I noticed something strange. When I got home from the grocery store, the pond water was cloudy. The lilies were torn apart, the stones displaced. It looked like someone had stomped through it. My security camera caught it all. 3 men from the HOA's hired maintenance crew had come while I was gone. They tried to pump the water out, then left when they saw my camera. I filed a police report, but the officer just sighed. "Technically, they're within their rights. If it's an easement area, you might want to talk to a lawyer." I didn't have the money for that, but I did have time and stubbornness. So I started recording everything, every visit, every letter, every knock on my door. One evening, my next-door neighbor Grace came over with a pie. She was in her 40s, kind eyes, and had been nothing but supportive since Anna's death. "I heard what they're doing," she said softly. "It's not right." I smiled tiredly. "They want to pave over her memory." Grace looked at the pond, her reflection trembling on the surface. "It's beautiful, you should keep fighting." I didn't realize how much those words meant until that night. I decided I wasn't backing down, no matter what. A week later, a meeting notice appeared on the community bulletin. HOA board hearing, property violation 204B, Langley residence. I went. The room was packed with neighbors, the air thick with whispers. Susan sat at the center of the table, her gavel ready. "Mr. Langley," she began, "you are in violation of Section 5.2 regarding unauthorized landscaping in a designated community easement." I stood. "That land holds my wife's memory. You can write as many sections as you want, but that's still my backyard." Someone in the crowd murmured, "Let him keep it." Susan's eyes flashed. "We understand your sentiment, but community planning requires cooperation." I handed her a printed copy of the county map. "That easement line you keep referencing, it's outdated. I had the county surveyor check last week. The line stops 10 feet short of the pond." She froze. "That's impossible." I smiled. "You can verify it. The deed is public record." The room fell silent. Susan whispered something to one of her board members. After a pause, she said, "We'll review this and reconvene." I left the meeting that night with a strange sense of triumph, but it didn't last. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery. A backhoe. I ran outside. There were workers digging just beyond my property fence, closer than before. When I shouted at them, one of them yelled back, "HOA authorization, trail project resumed." I looked at where they were digging and froze. They were rerouting the path, not through the pond but around it, which meant tearing down my fence and cutting through my garden instead. I shouted until my voice broke, but the machines kept roaring. By evening, my fence was gone. My rose bushes were crushed. The air smelled like diesel and soil. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the muddy mess outside. The pond glimmered faintly under the moonlight, untouched for now. That's when I heard it. A soft splash. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The water rippled again, but not from wind. Something was moving beneath the surface. I knelt beside the edge and shined the light in. For a moment, I thought it was an animal, but then I saw something else. Metal. A corner of what looked like a box, half buried under the stones at the bottom of the pond. I reached in and pulled it out, cold, rusted, heavy. A small metal chest sealed tight. My heart pounded. I'd never buried anything there. Anna hadn't either. I carried it inside, dripping, and placed it on the kitchen counter. The lock was old and brittle. With a screwdriver, I pried it open. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed and water-stained, deeds, old property documents, and something else, a letter folded and tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was Anna's. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means you found what they tried to hide." I sat there in silence, my breath shallow. What they tried to hide, who was she talking about? The letter continued. "When I first moved here, I found something buried under the lilac bush by the fence. Documents showing this property line was changed years ago without any notice to the homeowners. I kept them safe in case we ever needed them. If the HOA ever tries to take what's ours, use this." I flipped through the rest of the papers. She was right, old county maps, stamped and notarized, showing the original property line extending 20 feet farther back than the current record. The HOA had shrunk it decades ago. My head spun, she'd known. I stayed up all night studying every page, comparing signatures, seals, and dates. The more I looked, the clearer it became. The HOA had illegally claimed land from multiple properties, not just mine. It wasn't just about a path anymore. It was about corruption. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I had to do. I took the documents to Grace's house. She blinked in disbelief as I spread them out on her table. "You're saying they stole part of everyone's backyard?" I nodded. "If these are real and they are, the HOA been lying for years." She bit her lip. This could change everything. That day, I made copies. I sent one to the county clerk, another to a local reporter I found online who'd written about HOA abuse cases before. By evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a voice said, "You shouldn't have done that, Mr. Langley." It was Susan. Her voice was cold, almost shaking with anger. "You think you can smear the board with fake papers? You're making a big mistake." "They're not fake," I said quietly. "You just never thought anyone would find them." There was silence, then she said, "You'll regret this." She hung up. That night I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching my house. Every shadow outside felt too still, every sound too deliberate. But I didn't care. I had the truth now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like Anna was right there beside me, guiding me. Still, when I went out to check the pond one last time before bed, something made my stomach twist. The lilies were gone again. The water looked disturbed, freshly stirred. And at the edge of the pond, half buried in the mud, was a new stake. Bright orange. On it, written in black marker, were 3 words. "Eminent domain approved." The orange stake stood there like a warning or a promise. I stared at it for a long time. The letters "eminent domain approved" burned into my mind. It didn't make sense. HOA boards don't have that kind of power. Only government entities could claim land through eminent domain. But when I called the county office the next morning, they told me something that made my blood run cold. "Yes, Mr. Langley, the HOA submitted a proposal for temporary access under community development purposes. It's under review." "Temporary access?" I repeated. "They're digging through private property." The woman on the phone sighed. "You can file a dispute, but until it's processed, construction can continue." They'd found a loophole. That afternoon, I came home to find the pond surrounded by orange cones and fresh tire tracks. The water was drained halfway. The air reeked of diesel and mud. I ran out screaming, "Stop, you don't have permission to touch that." The foreman turned, clipboard in hand. "We've got HOA authorization. You can talk to your board president if you've got a problem." "Where is she?" I shouted. He pointed toward the cul-de-sac. And there she was. Susan, in her pressed white blouse, sunglasses, and perfect smile, standing beside her SUV like she owned the world. I stormed toward her. "You forged the paperwork." She didn't flinch. "Everything is within legal parameters." I held up the old documents Anna had hidden. "These show the real boundary line. You're stealing land that doesn't belong to you." Susan tilted her head. "Those are unverified copies, Mr. Langley. You think the county will take your word over ours." The way she said it, calm, confident, almost rehearsed, made me realize she wasn't bluffing. She'd done this before, maybe not just to me. I clenched my fists. "You'll regret this, Susan." She smirked. "Funny, that's what you said last time." When she left, I noticed something. Her SUV had the HOA's logo decal, but the plate number was missing from the registry I'd checked earlier. It was like the car didn't exist. That night, I went back to the pond with a flashlight. The water was nearly gone now, just muddy ripples under the beam. I crouched near the edge, thinking of Anna's letter again. If you're reading this, it means you found what they tried to hide. What else had they tried to hide? I took my shovel and began digging along the pond's far side near the old oak roots where the soil was dense and untouched. The shovel hit something hard after a few minutes, metal again. This time it wasn't a box, it was a pipe, a wide, old steel pipe capped and sealed. My heart started to race. The pond had never been there before, but the pipe had. I dug more, revealing a line of the same pipe running parallel to the property line. It wasn't for irrigation or drainage, it looked industrial. The next morning, I called an old friend, Mark, a retired county engineer. When he arrived, I showed him the exposed pipe. His eyes widened. "Where the hell did you find this?" "Under my pond." He crouched down, scraping mud away with his glove. "This is part of an old wastewater line, abandoned back in the 80s. The HOA wasn't supposed to build over this, it's still registered as restricted land." I stared at him. "You mean they can't legally dig here?" He nodded slowly. "Not unless they want to explain why they're trespassing over a contaminated utility zone." We both looked at the drain pond, the orange cones, the mud-stained grass. A slow smile spread across my face. That afternoon, I filed a complaint with the county environmental office, including photos, Mark's statement, and every record I had. By evening, construction halted, the workers disappeared, the machine sat silent, abandoned mid-dig. But that night, around 11 p.m., someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, no one was there, just an envelope taped to the glass. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It said, "You're making powerful enemies, Mr. Langley, be careful around the water." My blood went cold. I looked outside, scanning the shadows, but the street was empty. The next day, I found my pond completely drained, every drop of water gone, the lilies gone, the soil black and cracked. Grace came over as soon as she saw it. "They're not even pretending anymore," she said, shaking her head. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. My mind was somewhere else, on Anna's letter, on that pipe, on Susan's unregistered SUV. Something was connecting all of it. That night, I drove to the HOA office. The lights were still on. I parked across the street and watched through the window. Susan was there, talking to a man I didn't recognize, tall in a gray suit. He handed her a folder and she nodded before slipping it into the desk drawer. I recorded everything from my phone. The next morning, I went back during office hours, pretending to ask about my fine. When Susan stepped out for a call, I quietly opened that same drawer. The folder was gone, but there was something else, a set of printed permits stamped by the Langford County Development Authority. Each permit had one thing in common: the Community Trail Project signature line bore the same initials, SH. Susan Harlow. But the signature wasn't hers. I'd seen her handwriting in letters and emails. This one was too neat, too deliberate, forged. I took photos and left before she returned. That evening, Grace and I sat on her porch, pie and coffee between us, both silent for a while. Then she said, "You know, my property backs up to that same easement. When I bought the house, my deed said the same thing, 15 feet reserved for community access. But when I checked the county records, it didn't mention any easement at all." I looked up. "You mean it's not just me?" She nodded. "Maybe they've been rewriting property lines for years." We decided to knock on doors. That weekend, we went house to house along the back lots, 12 homes in total. 9 of them had the same story: disappearing property lines, unexplained easements, and mysterious maintenance visits. It was a pattern, and now we had proof. We gathered everything into one file and sent it to the reporter I'd contacted earlier. Her name was Lisa Tran, from a small local paper. She called me the next day. "Mr. Langley," she said, "if this is real, it's the biggest HOA fraud case this county's ever seen." I told her it's real. But before the story could break, something happened that changed everything. 2 nights later, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I ran to the backyard and froze, the pond liner, the bench, the grass around it, all burning. Flames rose high into the dark sky, crackling, spreading fast. I grabbed my hose, shouting for help. Grace came running with a bucket. It took both of us 15 minutes to put it out. When the fire died, the pond was gone, completely destroyed. The next morning, the fire department came. The investigator walked around, scribbling notes. Finally, he turned to me. Accelerant was used, gasoline likely intentional. "Do you know who did it?" I asked. He sighed. "No witnesses, but whoever it was knew exactly where to hit." Grace touched my shoulder. "They're trying to scare you." I looked at the blackened soil where the pond had been. "It won't work." That same day, the reporter called again. "Mr. Langley, my editor wants to verify your documents before we go public, but I just called the county office and they said your case file is missing." Missing. Completely wiped, no record of your complaint, no evidence logs, nothing. It felt like the ground dropped from beneath me. That evening, I received another envelope under my door. Inside was a single photo, a picture of Grace talking to me by the fence, dated that very morning. On the back, written in the same sharp handwriting as before. "She's next." I drove straight to her house. She was fine, but when I showed her the photo, her hands started shaking. "This is going too far," she whispered. "You need to leave, go somewhere safe." But I couldn't, not while they were still doing this, not while Anna's meadow was now a charred pit. That night I packed a small bag, grabbed my camera and went back to the HOA office. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, proof maybe, something tangible. The front door was locked but the side window wasn't. Inside, the building was quiet except for the hum of an air conditioner. I crept through the hallway to Susan's office. Her desk was clean, too clean. I started opening drawers, flipping through folders. Then I found it. A large envelope marked Trail Project Confidential. Inside were photos of the entire neighborhood layout, highlighted with red ink. Several lots were circled, including mine. Next to each circle was a number. At first I thought it was a code, then I realized it was dollar amounts. They were planning to sell the easement land to a private developer. The trail was just a cover. My pond had stood right over the pipeline they wanted to access, an old wastewater line that could be converted into a drainage route for a new subdivision project. They needed my land cleared. That's why Susan fought so hard, why the documents disappeared, why the fire. I snapped photos of everything, but as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. "Looking for something, Mr. Langley?" Susan stood in the doorway holding her phone. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "You really should have stopped digging," she said. I took a step back. "You set the fire." She smiled faintly. "You can't prove that." "I don't have to, I have this." I held up my phone, showing her the photos. "Your signatures, your plans, the whole thing." Her smile faded. "You have no idea what you've started." I walked past her, heart hammering. "Oh, I think I do." When I reached home, I sent every photo to Lisa, the reporter. She replied instantly, "Got them, publishing tomorrow morning." For the first time in months, I felt hope, real hope. But when I woke up the next day, my phone was flooded with messages, none from Lisa, all from neighbors. The HOA office had been vandalized overnight. Windows smashed, papers burned. The police were calling it possible arson. And Susan. She was missing. Her car was found 2 miles away, engine running, doors open, no sign of her. In the middle of the seat was an envelope, my name written across it. I drove to the police station immediately, demanding to see it. The detective on duty said, "You're listed as the recipient, but it's evidence now, we can't release it." "What did it say?" He hesitated. "We're still verifying, but it looks like a confession." He paused, lowering his voice. "It mentioned you, the pond, and something about what's buried underneath." My heart started to race. Underneath what? He glanced at his notes. "Underneath the old pipe." I left the station shaking. The pond was gone, burned, drained, ruined, but the pipe was still there. Whatever she'd been hiding, it wasn't over yet. And if her confession was real, then maybe Anna's letter hadn't been the last secret buried in my backyard. Because that night, under the pale moonlight, I heard it again. A hollow echo from deep underground. A metallic thud. Like something or someone moving beneath the earth. And that's when I realized the pond wasn't just built over their secret, it was protecting it. I stood in the middle of my backyard, the smell of burnt grass still thick in the air, staring at the blackened hole where the pond used to be. The echo came again, faint, metallic, deliberate, not the sound of shifting pipes, not animals, something deeper. It stopped as soon as I stepped closer. I dropped to my knees and dug my hands into the wet soil. I didn't care how filthy it was. Every handful of mud felt like peeling back layers of deceit. My flashlight beam flickered over the exposed steel pipe. I banged on it once, nothing. Twice, another hollow knock like something was sealed inside. That's when I called Mark, the retired engineer. He showed up around midnight, flashlight in one hand and a pry bar in the other. He crouched beside the pipe, frowning. "This doesn't make sense, it's not capped properly. You see that seam, it's been welded shut recently." I blinked. Recently, as in within the last few months. He nodded. "This weld isn't old. I can smell the residue, epoxy sealant, modern stuff." A chill ran through me. So someone's been down here after the line was supposedly abandoned. He scraped the metal lightly. Whatever's inside, they didn't want anyone finding it. I swallowed hard. "Can you open it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not tonight. If I break it wrong, it could collapse. You'll need cutting tools, or better yet, call the county. They can verify what this is." But I already knew the county wouldn't help, not after my complaint vanished, not after Susan's threats. Mark looked at me for a long moment. "You think this is connected to the HOA?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." He sighed. "Be careful, Daniel, you've stirred up something big." After he left, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the hole, waiting for the sound to come again. It didn't. The silence was worse. The next morning, I went to the police station to check on Susan's case. The detective looked exhausted. "Still no trace," he said, "but the confession note she left, there's something strange." I leaned forward. "What?" "It's handwritten, but the ink analysis came back inconsistent. Different pen types, different strokes, like someone wrote it for her." I frowned. "So you think it's fake?" He shrugged. "Could be, or she was forced to write it." He handed me a printed transcript. The last few lines caught my eye. "They'll find it eventually, under the water. It was never supposed to see daylight." I stared at the words, under the water, the pond, the pipe, it all connected. I thanked him and left, my pulse racing. When I got home, Grace was waiting on my porch. "You won't believe this," she said, holding out her phone. A news alert flashed on the screen. "Local HOA President Susan Harlow found dead, body discovered, abandoned construction site." I read the headline twice before the words sank in. According to the report, her car had been moved. The police found her body half buried under a pile of gravel near the site of the same trail project she'd been pushing. The cause of death, drowning. Grace whispered, "Drowning, but there's no water out there." I didn't have an answer. My throat tightened. The article mentioned one more detail. Traces of contaminated water were found in her lungs, matching residue from an outdated wastewater system. The same line that ran under my yard. That night I called Mark again, told him everything. He came over at once, pale and grim. "If someone used that line recently," he said, "it could mean there's a secondary chamber, a maintenance vault or drainage pit. Maybe that's where they did something." "Something like what?" He didn't answer. We brought out a floodlight and set it beside the hole. The mud gleamed slick and dark under the beam. With his grinder, Mark began cutting into the welded seam. Sparks flew, hissing into the dirt. The sound was unbearable, screeching, metallic, desperate. Then, with a deep groan, the pipe gave way. A rush of foul air burst out, stale, chemical, suffocating. Mark gagged. "God, that smell." I shined the light inside. For a moment, all I saw was black sludge, then something white glimmered beneath it. I reached in with a gloved hand and pulled. What came out made my stomach drop. A bone, human. I stumbled back, heart pounding, bile in my throat. "Oh my God." Mark crouched, stunned. "We need to call the police now." We did. They arrived within the hour, lights flashing, radios crackling. Within minutes, the backyard was crawling with investigators. They cordoned off the entire area, taking photos, samples, measurements. One officer approached me, eyes wide. Sir, there's more inside, a lot more. The backyard became a crime scene. I watched from my porch as they unearthed the sealed section of pipe completely. What they found made national headlines the next morning. 7 sets of human remains, all buried within the abandoned pipeline beneath my property. Every news station in the county was there. Reporters swarmed outside my fence shouting questions. Grace stayed with me, gripping my hand, whispering that it wasn't my fault. But guilt is a strange thing. Even though I hadn't done anything, I felt it sinking into me like the mud itself. The police spent 2 days excavating the site. The forensic report confirmed the remains dated back over 20 years, long before I ever moved in. But there was one chilling detail: several bones bore markings consistent with improper disposal. The case exploded into something far bigger than an HOA dispute. The county launched a full investigation into the original development company, the same one that had established the HOA decades ago. Turns out that company had been shut down quietly in the early 2000s for environmental violations. No one had ever asked what those violations were. Until now. On the 3rd day, I was sitting with a detective when he handed me a photo. Recognize this. It was a faded construction picture, workers standing near the same lot before any houses were built. Behind them, a sign, Langford Residential Development, 1998. In the corner, a face I never expected to see. Susan, younger, standing beside a man in a hard hat, the same man I'd seen her meeting in the HOA office that night. My chest tightened. Who is he? The detective checked his notes. Richard Hale, original site supervisor, disappeared in 2001, never found. I whispered, maybe now he has been. Grace covered her mouth. You think she knew, that's why she wanted to dig here? I nodded slowly. She wasn't building a path, she was trying to bury the evidence. But that didn't explain one thing: why had she written that note? Why confess if she'd already been part of it? That night, after the police cleared out, I sat alone in the backyard. The pond was gone, the pipe exposed, the earth scarred and open. It looked like a wound. I whispered, you knew, didn't you, Anna? Yeah. I don't know what I expected in answer, a breeze, a sign. But then, from the dark corner near the fence, something caught my eye, a glimmer of metal half buried in the mud. I walked over and dug it out with my hands. It was another box, smaller than the first, rusted but intact. Inside were photos, old black and white ones, the same construction site, the same people, and a handwritten note folded carefully. I tried to tell them, they wouldn't listen. They kept building. They said no one would ever know, but I saw what they buried. I heard them at night bringing the barrels. The pond was supposed to hide it. It wasn't signed. But on the back of the note, a faint set of initials was scrawled in pencil, R.H. Richard Hale. The man who disappeared. The realization hit me like thunder. Susan hadn't been trying to hide the past, she'd been trying to keep it from resurfacing. Someone else had forced her into it. The next morning, the detective called again. We ran DNA tests on the remains. Some match old missing persons reports, construction workers mostly, but one's different. He hesitated. One is a woman, early 40s. I felt my chest tighten. Who? Still confirming, but based on the records we found in your wife's box, we think she may have known her. My voice broke. Anna. No, he said softly, someone she might have met through her work at the clinic, a woman named Margaret Harlow. I froze. Harlow. Yes, Susan's mother. The world went silent. I hung up and just stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing. The pieces clicked painfully into place. Susan hadn't been a villain. She'd been a daughter trying to cover her mother's death, and the people who caused it had buried both the truth and her guilt under my backyard. Grace came by later that day. I told her everything. She sat quietly for a long time, then said, you know, maybe your pond wasn't just about peace, maybe it was supposed to uncover what no one else had the courage to. I looked outside where the crater still waited, black and endless. She was right. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand: the last sound I'd heard before the police came, that rhythmic metallic thud from underground. The pipe had been sealed shut. No animal could have gotten in. And yet 2 nights later, as I stood by the window again, it came back. Clang. Clang, clang, steady echoing coming from beneath the dirt. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. The sound was clearer now, closer. I knelt near the exposed section of pipe and pressed my ear to it. The vibration hummed through the metal, deliberate, timed like a message. Then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, a faint hiss escaped from the open seam, a breath of foul air rising from deep below. Something was still moving down there. I didn't sleep that night, and when dawn broke, I saw new footprints in the mud, small, bare, leading from the pipe toward the fence and stopping right at the edge of the burned pond. That was when I realized the story wasn't over. Not for me. Not for Susan. And definitely not for whatever or whoever still waited beneath the earth. Because that morning, when the sun rose and light hit the pond's charred remains, I saw something shimmer just below the surface of the damp soil, a reflection. Water slowly, silently returning to the pond on its own. When the pond was finally complete, something changed. The HOA came again, demanding it be filled, but the entire neighborhood stood beside me. They'd found peace in that pond, children played, birds nested, and people gathered. The board quietly backed down. My pond wasn't rebellion anymore, it was community.